The Omega offered her only necklace to free the Alpha slave, and he claimed her instantly. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character, Elena Carter. She stood at the edge of the square where voices overlapped like restless waves, not loud with cruelty, but heavy with judgment, the kind that settled into the bones and reminded everyone who belonged and who did not. And Elena had learned long ago that she was meant to remain unseen, an Omega with no banner, no influential name, and no protection beyond her own quiet resolve. The sun hung low above the rooftops, casting long shadows across the stone ground, and the air smelled of dust and old iron, familiar scents to someone who survived by staying observant and small. Elena kept her hands folded in front of her, fingers brushing the thin chain beneath her collarbone, the only necklace she owned, its small pendant warm from her skin as if it remembered every mile she had walked, and every night she had whispered promises to herself that she would endure. She had not come to the square out of curiosity, nor hope, but obligation, because work led her here and survival rarely asked permission. And yet something held her still, a pull she could not explain, a tension humming softly beneath her ribs. At the center of the square stood a raised platform, plain and unadorned, where people gathered not to celebrate, but to decide the worth of lives. And though Elena avoided looking directly at it, her awareness kept drifting back, as if a single presence there bent the air around it. When she finally lifted her gaze, her breath caught, not from fear but recognition, sharp and sudden, like hearing her name spoken by someone she had never met, because there he was, a man standing with a stillness that defied the noise around him, tall even without trying, his posture calm despite the restraints meant to humble him. And his eyes, steady and unyielding, swept the crowd without searching, as if he already knew exactly where his fate waited. Elena did not know his name, did not know his past, only that the quiet strength in him felt misplaced among whispered transactions and lowered expectations. And for a moment she forgot to breathe as their gazes met, brief but undeniable, something ancient stirring in that space between them, something that did not ask permission or explanation. She told herself to look away, reminded herself of rules learned through hard years, that Omegas did not interfere, that survival meant restraint, but her feet did not move and her hand tightened over the necklace, as if it understood what her mind had not yet accepted. Around her, the square continued its rhythm, footsteps passing within a few feet, voices rising and falling, time pressing forward. Yet Elena felt suspended, balanced on a single decision she had not known she was capable of making, the kind that would change not just a day but the shape of her entire life. And as the sun dipped lower, painting the stone in gold and shadow, she realized with a calm certainty that whatever happened next would begin with her, an Omega no one noticed, standing exactly where she was meant to be. Elena Carter had learned to live by watching rather than being watched, by listening more than speaking, and as the square continued to hum around her, she reminded herself that attention was dangerous for someone like her, yet the pull she felt refused to fade. She shifted her weight, the worn soles of her boots scraping lightly against stone, and tried to ground herself in familiar details, the sun warming her shoulders, the murmur of conversation rolling past like distant traffic, the steady rhythm of her own breathing. This place was not meant for Omegas who survived on quiet work and careful steps, and she had promised herself she would leave as soon as her errand was done, but every instinct she possessed resisted the idea of turning away. She had seen many men pass through the square before, some proud, some broken, most forgettable, yet the one on the platform remained carved into her awareness, not because of what was done to him, but because of what could not be taken away, a calm that did not bend under scrutiny. Elena lowered her gaze again, but the image stayed with her, and she felt something stir beneath her ribs, not fear, not attraction in any simple sense, but recognition, the unsettling sense that the world had shifted half an inch off center. She pressed her thumb against the small pendant beneath her collarbone. tracing its familiar curve, and memories rose unbidden, her mother's voice telling her that some things were worth more than coin, that kindness was not weakness, that survival without dignity was its own kind of loss. Those words had stayed with her through winters that dropped below freezing and summers that stretched endlessly under harsh sun, through days when she walked miles with little more than determination to carry her forward, and now they echoed louder than ever. Around her, people spoke in measured tones, discussing value as if it were a number that could be neatly written down, and Elena felt the quiet ache of knowing how easily someone could be reduced to a line item. She had lived that reality herself, invisible and less needed, overlooked and less convenient, and it was perhaps that shared understanding that kept her rooted in place. She took a step closer, then another, stopping well short of drawing notice. And from this distance she could see more clearly the set of his shoulders, the way his gaze never lingered on the crowd but remained inward, steady, as if he carried his own horizon with him. When his eyes lifted again, briefly, they passed over her, and she told herself she imagined the pause, the flicker of awareness, yet her pulse quickened all the same. Elena swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry, and considered leaving while she still could, while her role in this moment remained that of a passerby who would not be remembered. That was the safer choice, the sensible one, the choice she had made 1,000 times before, and yet safety had never given her more than survival, never offered meaning, never answered the quiet questions she carried at night. The necklace rested against her skin, its weight slight but constant, and she felt the truth settle with unexpected clarity that whatever happened next would demand something from her, not because she was strong or chosen, but because she was present and capable of deciding. She did not yet know what form that decision would take, only that it would ask for courage she had never tested. And as the sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the square, Elena Carter stood still, an omega among many, feeling the shape of her life shift toward a moment that would not wait for permission. The man on the platform remained still as the square continued its slow, relentless rhythm, and Elena found herself noticing details she had not allowed herself to see before. The way his hands rested without tension, the even rise and fall of his chest, the quiet authority in his posture that did not seek attention yet commanded it all the same. She wondered how someone could look so composed in a place designed to strip people of dignity, and the thought unsettled her more than fear ever could. A voice nearby spoke about numbers and conditions, words shaped to sound reasonable, and Elena felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the ache of knowing how easily lives were discussed as transactions. She had been on the edges of such conversations before, always careful to remain silent, always careful not to remind others that she existed, but today's silence felt heavier, as if it carried weight she could no longer set down. She edged another step closer, stopping just within the crowd's loose boundary, close enough to hear the scrape of stone beneath the platform and the soft rustle of fabric when the man shifted his stance by an inch. He lifted his head slightly then, not in defiance but awareness, and his gaze moved across the faces before him with measured calm, until it paused again, unmistakably this time, on Elena. The moment stretched, quiet yet charged, and Elena felt as though the air between them had tightened, as if an invisible thread had drawn taut. She did not look away. She could not. Something in his expression changed, subtle enough that no one else would have noticed, a flicker of recognition that mirrored her own, and her breath caught as the world narrowed to that single exchange. She had no language for what passed between them, only the certainty that it was real and that it mattered. Around them, people shifted, some glancing at the man with caution, others with thinly veiled curiosity, but Elena remained where she was, her heart beating louder than the surrounding noise. She thought of all the times she had chosen caution over instinct, all the times she had turned away from moments that felt too large, too demanding, and she wondered what those choices had truly given her beyond survival. The pendant beneath her collarbone pressed warm against her skin, and she closed her fingers around it, grounding herself in its familiar presence. It had been with her through years of uncertainty, through nights when she counted stars instead of sleep, through days when every mile walked felt like a quiet act of defiance, and now it seemed to pulse with significance she had never noticed before. A murmur rippled through the crowd as someone stepped closer to the platform, and Elena sensed the moment shifting, urgency threading through the air like an approaching storm. The man's gaze never left her, not demanding, not pleading, simply present, as if he trusted her to decide without pressure, and that trust, unspoken yet profound, settled heavily on her shoulders. She felt suddenly aware of her own smallness, of how easily she could step back and vanish into the crowd, return to a life defined by careful boundaries, and no one would stop her. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like loss. Elena drew a steady breath, her resolve forming quietly, not with grand declarations, but with clarity, the understanding that some moments asked to be met fully or not at all. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that stretched toward the platform, and as Elena stood there, an omega among many, she knew that the choice ahead would change the shape of her life, not because she sought greatness, but because she refused, just this once, to look away. The tension in the square shifted almost imperceptibly at first, like a change in weather felt before clouds appeared, and Elena sensed it through the subtle movements around her, the way shoulders straightened, the way voices lowered and sharpened with interest. Someone near the platform spoke louder now, not shouting but projecting authority, and the crowd leaned in as if drawn by gravity, eager to witness a moment they could later recount. Elena felt eyes brush past her, curious, dismissive, some amused that an omega lingered so close, and a quiet heat rose beneath her skin, not anger but awareness, the familiar knowledge of being judged without being known. She kept her posture steady, refusing to fold inward, even as murmurs rippled around her about rank, usefulness, and worth. A comment drifted close enough for her to hear, light in tone yet heavy in implication, suggesting that those who lingered too long in places like this often forgot their place, and a few people chuckled, not cruelly, but carelessly, as if the moment existed solely for their entertainment. Elena's cheeks warmed, yet she did not retreat, her gaze anchored forward, her focus narrowing to the man on the platform, who had not moved, who had not reacted to the shifting mood, whose calm now felt like a quiet challenge to the entire square. He stood as though he were not being measured by others, but waiting, patient, certain, and Elena wondered how many times he had been underestimated by people who mistook restraint for weakness. Another voice joined the first, measured and official, listing conditions and expectations in a tone meant to sound reasonable, and Elena recognized that voice, the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to deciding outcomes without consequence. The words floated over the crowd, settling into the air like dust, and Elena felt something tighten inside her, the familiar discomfort of watching power exercised without empathy. She shifted her stance, the pendant beneath her collarbone pressing more insistently against her skin, and she drew a slow breath, steadying herself as attention turned briefly in her direction. A glance, a raised brow, the faintest smirk passed between two onlookers, their expressions suggesting mild surprise that someone like her remained so close, and Elena felt the weight of their assumptions without needing to hear them spoken. She had endured worse than glances, endured seasons of being overlooked, and she told herself that she could endure this too, yet something about the moment refused to be dismissed. The man's gaze found her again, unwavering, and in it she did not see expectation or demand, only recognition, as if he saw her clearly despite the noise and judgment surrounding them. That look steadied her more than any reassurance could have, and she lifted her chin a fraction, meeting his gaze without apology. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, curiosity edging into impatience, and Elena sensed that the moment was approaching a threshold, that soon a decision would be made that would close a door or open one she could not yet see. A subtle pressure settled over the square, the kind that urged people to step back into familiar roles, to let events unfold without interference. And Elena felt that pressure keenly, felt how easy it would be to comply, to disappear into the flow of bodies and return to the margins where she was expected to exist. Instead, she remained, her heart beating steadily now, her resolve quiet but firm, understanding that dignity was not something granted by others, but something chosen in moments like this. The sun dipped lower, casting longer shadows that crept toward the platform, and as the crowd's attention sharpened, Elena Carter stood her ground, an omega under scrutiny, carrying a choice that had not yet been spoken but was already shaping the space around her. Elena felt the moment crystallize around her, the murmurs of the crowd receding into a distant hum as clarity settled with unexpected calm, and she understood that waiting any longer would be its own kind of decision, one she would regret. She stepped forward before doubt could reclaim its ground, the sound of her boots against stone louder than she expected, and a few heads turned, surprise flickering across faces that had not noticed her before. The official voice near the platform paused mid-sentence, curiosity briefly interrupting routine, and Elena sensed the weight of attention settle onto her shoulders, not crushing but insistent. She stopped a few feet from the platform, close enough now that the man could see her clearly, close enough that she could see the quiet intensity in his eyes, steady and unreadable, yet softened by something that felt like understanding. The square seemed to hold its breath as she lifted her hand to her collarbone, fingers finding the thin chain that had rested there for so many years. She hesitated for a single heartbeat, memories flickering through her mind, her mother fastening the necklace with careful hands, the promise that it would remind her of who she was when the world tried to tell her otherwise, the nights when she had clutched it for comfort as she walked miles alone under open sky. It was not valuable in the way the crowd measured worth, but it was everything to her, a constant companion through uncertainty, and releasing it felt like stepping into unknown ground without assurance of return. Elena drew a steady breath, her pulse strong but even, and gently lifted the chain over her head, the pendant catching the light for a brief second before settling into her palm. A ripple moved through the crowd, whispers rising, some incredulous, some amused, others sharpening with interest, and Elena felt the familiar prickle of being underestimated. Yet she stood tall, her grip firm as she extended her hand toward the platform. She did not raise her voice, did not dramatize the moment, because she did not need to, and when she spoke, her words carried with quiet clarity across the space between them. She offered the necklace without explanation, without apology, her gaze never leaving the man's, trusting that he would understand the intent even if others did not. For a long second, nothing happened, and the square seemed suspended between expectation and disbelief. Someone laughed softly behind her, the sound edged with disbelief that an omega would step forward with such confidence, and another voice murmured about foolish gestures and misplaced sympathy, but Elena did not turn. Her focus remained fixed, her resolve unshaken, because this choice was not made for the crowd or for approval, but because it felt necessary, because something within her insisted that dignity mattered more than possession. The man's eyes lowered briefly to the pendant resting in her open palm, then lifted again to meet her gaze, and Elena felt a subtle shift in the air, not dramatic, but undeniable, like the world adjusting to a new alignment. She sensed recognition there, deeper than gratitude, deeper than surprise, something ancient stirring beneath restraint, and her breath caught as she realized that her offering had reached more than a surface exchange. The official near the platform cleared his throat, preparing to intervene, uncertainty flickering across his face as procedure wavered, and the crowd leaned closer, eager to see how this interruption would resolve. Elena held her position, arms steady despite the tremor in her muscles, her heart open yet grounded, understanding fully that once released, the necklace could not be reclaimed. She had given it freely, not as a bargain but as a statement, and as the light shifted across the square, casting her shadow long and unwavering, Elena Carter stood in the quiet aftermath of her choice, unaware of how profoundly it had already begun to reshape the balance of the moment. For a heartbeat that felt longer than time, nothing moved, and then the air itself seemed to shift, subtle, yet unmistakable, as if the square had recognized a rule older than its stones. Elena felt it first, a warmth blooming in her chest where the necklace had rested for years, spreading outward in gentle waves that steadied rather than overwhelmed her, and she knew with quiet certainty that her offering had crossed a boundary unseen by most. The crowd sensed it too, though they lacked words for the sensation, their murmurs fading into uneasy silence as the man on the platform straightened slightly, not with strain but awareness, as if something dormant had stirred. His gaze lowered once more to the pendant in Elena's open palm, and for the first time she saw something shift openly in his expression, Not surprise, not hesitation, but recognition edged with respect. The official near the platform faltered, his practiced confidence wavering as he glanced between Elena and the man. Uncertainty replacing routine, and the square felt suddenly smaller, contained by a presence that did not raise its voice, yet demanded attention. Elena's breathing slowed, her pulse steady, as she became aware of a quiet connection forming, not spoken, not physical, but deeply real, like an invisible thread drawing taut between 2 points that had always belonged together. She did not step closer, did not retreat, understanding instinctively that this moment required stillness, and she held her posture with calm resolve, her arms still extended, her hand open. The man lifted his head fully now, his shoulders settling into a stance that radiated authority without force, and when he spoke, his voice was low and even, carrying across the square with effortless clarity. He did not address the crowd at first, nor the official, but Elena, his words shaped with intention, acknowledging her choice without embellishment, without gratitude that diminished its weight. As his voice reached her, Elena felt the warmth in her chest respond, a gentle pressure that affirmed rather than claimed, and she understood that something had been activated, not through demand or dominance, but through sacrifice freely given. A few in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, some sensing the gravity of the exchange, others unsettled by rules they did not fully remember, yet felt compelled to respect. The official cleared his throat again, attempting to reclaim control, but his words stumbled, lacking the certainty they carried moments before, and he stepped back half a pace without realizing it, conceding space to something beyond procedure. Elena noticed the movement and felt a quiet sense of balance return, as if the world had corrected itself by a fraction, aligning with a truth long ignored. The man's attention turned outward then, sweeping across the square with measured calm, and the murmurs that rose were hushed by the steady presence he projected, an authority that did not rely on volume or threat. Elena sensed the invisible bond settle, not constricting, not overwhelming, but grounding, like standing on solid earth after a long journey across uncertain ground, and she realized that her choice had not diminished her, but clarified her place within the moment. The pendant still rested in her palm, its familiar weight now lighter, transformed by purpose, and she knew without regret that she would not ask for it back. As the sun dipped lower, casting the square in warm hues of gold and shadow, Elena Carter stood at the center of a quiet shift in power, aware that an ancient law had been acknowledged, not proclaimed loudly, but honored through recognition, and that the world around her would not return to its previous shape. The moment the recognition settled fully, the man's presence seemed to expand without him taking a single step, and the square responded instinctively, conversation stopping mid-breath, bodies stilling, as if the space itself had been called to attention. Elena felt the invisible bond tighten just enough to be undeniable, not restrictive but resolute, and she understood that whatever rule had awakened now demanded acknowledgement. The man turned his gaze outward, finally addressing the gathered crowd, and when he spoke, his voice carried with calm authority, neither raised nor harsh, yet impossible to ignore. He did not ask permission, did not negotiate terms, because the law he invoked did not require approval, only recognition, and as his words unfolded, the meaning landed with quiet force. He named the act for what it was, a sacrifice freely given, a price paid not with coin but with intent, and as he spoke, Elena sensed the square shifting around her, the unspoken hierarchy bending under the weight of something older and stronger than custom. The official near the platform stiffened, color draining slightly from his face as understanding dawned, and he took another step back, no longer the arbiter of this moment. Elena's heart beat steadily, the warmth in her chest steady and grounding. As she listened, her gaze fixed on the man whose calm certainty felt like a shelter rather than a claim. When he turned back to her, his eyes softened with a clarity that took her breath away, and he spoke her name, Elena Carter, with careful emphasis, as if setting it into place within a larger truth. He declared the bond plainly, without flourish, acknowledging her action as the catalyst that activated an ancient right, and in that declaration, Elena felt the world tilt, not violently, but decisively, like a door opening that had always been meant to open. The crowd reacted in a wave of hushed astonishment, whispers rising and falling, some confused, some uneasy, others awed by the finality of his words, and Elena stood at the center of it, grounded and unexpectedly calm. She realized then that fear had loosened its grip, replaced by a sense of rightness she had never known, and she met his gaze without hesitation, accepting the recognition without surrendering herself. The man extended his hand, not in demand but invitation, a gesture that honored choice rather than erased it, and Elena felt the bond respond, a gentle pull that affirmed her agency. She placed the pendant into his hand at last, releasing it fully, and when his fingers closed around it, she sensed the exchange complete, the sacrifice acknowledged and sealed. He lifted his chin slightly, addressing the square once more, his voice steady as he confirmed what had already been set in motion, that the bond stood recognized before witnesses, that the law had been satisfied, and that the matter was concluded. The official swallowed hard and nodded stiffly, words failing him, and the crowd parted almost unconsciously, creating space where there had been none. Elena felt a quiet awe ripple through her, not at power displayed, but at restraint, at the way authority had been exercised without cruelty or spectacle. As the man stepped down from the platform, the distance between them closing by mere feet, Elena felt the bond settle into something stable and enduring, not ownership, but connection forged through choice and respect. She lifted her gaze to meet his, her posture steady, her voice calm when she spoke at last, acknowledging the moment without dramatics, because she understood now that true shifts did not require excess. The square remained silent as they stood facing one another, an omega and an alpha bound by an ancient law reawakened, and in that silence, Elena Carter realized that the instant he claimed her was not the loss of her freedom, but the beginning of a life where her courage had been seen and honored. As the square slowly found its breath again, Elena became aware of how profoundly the balance around her had changed, not through force or spectacle, but through acknowledgement that could not be undone. The space that had once pressed in on her now felt open, the crowd unconsciously maintaining distance, as if respecting a boundary newly drawn, and she sensed eyes on her not with dismissal, but with uncertainty, even respect. The man stood beside her with quiet assurance, his presence steady and composed, and when he shifted his stance to face the official, the movement carried an authority that required no reinforcement. He spoke again, calmly outlining what the recognition meant, clarifying that the bond acknowledged was not subject to negotiation or reversal, and his words settled over the square like a final seal. Elena listened closely, absorbing the weight of each phrase, understanding that while she had stepped forward alone, she no longer stood unguarded. The official nodded stiffly, the confidence that had defined him earlier now replaced by careful compliance, and Elena recognized the subtle reversal unfolding, power reorienting itself around a truth long upheld yet rarely witnessed. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as some began to piece together implications they had not considered, the quiet realization that the man before them was not simply a figure caught in circumstance, but one whose standing carried reach far beyond the platform. Elena felt the bond respond to that recognition, a steady presence at the edge of her awareness, not overwhelming but reassuring, as if reminding her that she was not required to shrink to accommodate this new reality. The man turned to her then, his expression attentive, and asked her simply if she was steady, not assuming, not commanding, and Elena answered with a nod that surprised her in its certainty. She was steady, more than she had ever been, anchored by the knowledge that her choice had not erased her agency, but strengthened it. He acknowledged her response with a faint incline of his head, a gesture of respect rather than possession, and the crowd watched in quiet astonishment as the exchange unfolded without drama, without spectacle, yet with unmistakable significance. Someone whispered a name behind them, recognition spreading in hushed tones as the man's identity began to align with long-held rumors and half-remembered stories. And Elena felt the shift deepen, understanding that she stood beside someone whose reach extended far beyond this square. Yet he did not allow the murmurs to swell, raising a hand just enough to still them, his composure guiding the space back into order, and Elena noted how effortlessly he did so, not by demand but by presence alone. He informed the official of the next steps with measured clarity, outlining arrangements that acknowledged the bond without exploiting it, and the official complied without argument, his authority now clearly subordinate. Elena felt a quiet amazement ripple through her, not at dominance displayed, but at restraint, at the way power could be exercised without diminishing others. As the square resumed its slow movement, people giving them a wide berth, Elena sensed the world reorienting itself around her, expectations shifting, paths opening that had once been closed. She was aware of questions forming, of scrutiny yet to come, but none of it unsettled her as it once would have. The man glanced down at her, his gaze warm but steady, and assured her softly that she would not be left to navigate what followed alone. That recognition carried responsibility as well as protection. Elena met his gaze, gratitude rising without dependence, and she replied with quiet confidence that she understood, that she had stepped into this moment willingly and would meet what came next with the same resolve. As they began to move away from the platform together, the square parting before them, Elena Carter felt the final traces of her former invisibility fall away, replaced not by fear of exposure, but by the calm understanding that she had been seen, acknowledged, and respected, and that whatever lay ahead would be faced not as a shadow at the edge of the world, but as a woman whose courage had shifted its course. The square receded behind them as they moved toward the outer edge, the noise softening into a distant backdrop, and Elena felt the significance of the moment settle into something quieter and deeper than astonishment. The air beyond the crowd felt cooler, freer, and she realized how tightly she had been holding herself together until now. How many years she had spent measuring her steps to avoid notice. Walking beside him, she felt no need to shrink or hurry, her pace natural, her shoulders relaxed, as if her body understood before her mind that the rules governing her existence had shifted. He guided her with subtle awareness, not by directing her path, but by matching her stride, allowing space rather than taking it, and that simple consideration anchored her more firmly than any promise could have. As they reached a point where the stone gave way to packed earth, he paused, turning slightly so the fading sunlight caught his profile, and Elena sensed the bond respond, attentive but calm, like a shared breath. He spoke to her then in a lower tone meant only for her, acknowledging the courage it took to step forward when no one expected it, and Elena felt warmth rise behind her eyes, not from overwhelm, but from recognition she had never received before. She answered honestly, telling him that she had not known what the outcome would be, only that walking away would have cost her more than she was willing to lose, and he listened without interruption, his focus complete. The bond seemed to settle further with that exchange, not tightening, but aligning, and Elena understood that this connection was not built on illusion or impulse, but on truth spoken without ornament. He shared his name fully then, Dominic Hale, and the weight of it carried meaning that resonated through her awareness, aligning with the murmurs she had overheard, the stories whispered at the edges of memory. Elena did not react with awe or fear, only acceptance, because the man beside her had already shown her who he was where it mattered most. Dominic acknowledged her calm with a faint smile that did not seek to impress, and he assured her that what followed would not be easy, that recognition brought attention and responsibility, but that she would not be required to navigate it alone or surrender herself to it. Elena appreciated the honesty, the absence of romanticized assurances, and she responded with equal clarity, telling him that she did not regret her choice and would meet what came next with intention rather than hesitation. They stood there for a moment longer, the sounds of the square now distant enough to feel irrelevant, and Elena noticed how the world seemed to hold steady around them, as if acknowledging a conclusion rather than demanding more. Dominic gestured toward the path ahead, not as an order but an invitation, and Elena stepped forward beside him, her confidence no longer borrowed from circumstance but rooted in self-knowledge. As they began to walk again, she felt the last echoes of her former invisibility fade, replaced not by spectacle, but by quiet certainty. She had not been chosen because she was weak or compliant, nor claimed because she was convenient, but recognized because she had acted with courage when it mattered. The future stretched ahead, undefined yet open, and Elena felt no need to rush toward it, content to take each step with awareness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in muted shades of gold and blue. Elena Carter realized that the moment she had offered everything she owned, she had not lost herself, but found the beginning of a life shaped by dignity, partnership, and a strength that no one could ever overlook again.